Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and on this episode, I've got Ross Robertson on the line, Mr. Big Water Fishing himself. Ross has been in this industry for a long time, growing up with Lake Erie right in his backyard. So while he's got some windshield time and he's headed to the next big walleye bite, we get an update on his career and he shares some great insight on trolling walleyes on the Great Lakes.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul Trucking is looking for skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. Long Haul values their drivers and shippers like nobody else. Their employee-owned ESOP structure has them leading the industry in pay and benefits, geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. Long Haul is a people-first company, and it shows. They take pride in giving their drivers an opportunity to have a fulfilling career along with a healthy, happy life on the home front. If you're a professional CDL driver, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or look them up online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept.
Ross Robertson on the road, heading to another good walleye bite. For a little bit of context, you've been fishing the Great Lakes your whole career, but specifically, like, where are you from? Where do you fish out of? What's your home turf?
I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. I'm kind of known as the Lake Erie guy. I fish most of the Great Lakes, but Lake Erie is kind of my backyard. I live in Fort Clinton, Ohio right now. Or I shouldn't say I live. That's where I spend most of my time But Lake Erie, Western, and Central Basin is kind of my playground.
And you've been in the industry quite a long time. How old were you when you came into the industry, and what has kind of been the evolution of your career?
I started. I mean, I don't know how you would say it, but I started like with Gary Roach and Dave Hansen, traveling around to PWT events and helping them out. And when I was about 15 or 16. In that range, and I worked at a tackle store, when I was in high school. I went to college, kind of going through the motions, even though I do have a finance degree. And so my entire adult life, I've never had a quote-unquote normal, real job. I've been in the outdoor industry. I was selling boats during college and early in my career. That kind of helped provide me with, the income to do those other things, as well as I started guiding on boats, working as a mate in my teens, and started my own gig, and I was about 20, I think, 19 or 20. So I've been guiding. I think this is my 21st year that I've had that deal, and kind of one of the things that helped break me out for sure was I think I was 18 when I wrote my first feature for In Fisherman magazine, because doing some stuff with the lenders even back then, and that was definitely a catapult for me in the industry, because everything was just kind of coming about, like trolling, techniques were really just kind of developing. Offshore boards hadn't been out that long. The internet was just kind of popping, and I was a younger guy, so kind of jumping on all of those things. It was bad timing in the economy, but good timing in the sense of things were really starting to change and explode in the professional fishing world.
And what was that like? I mean, that would be, pre-social media and things like that. It's easy to see how some people kind of blow up really fast, like young people blow up really fast in the climate that we're in today with just how accessible everybody is. But describe what being catapulted in the industry at a young age was like back then. I mean, what was happening to you? Like, was the phone ringing? I mean, you were guiding already. I mean, what was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I do a mean Al Linder impression. And,
Nice.
Bub, you need one of them web deals. This is the thing. Education's how you're going to make the money. I mean, that's the deal. I mean, you're the Great Lakes guy, but education, that's what you need.
I love it.
And to this day, Al just laughs and shakes his head when I see him with this. But truthfully, back when I was in college, I did a website in literally my dorm room. And this is when, my freshman year in college, I think that's the first time I even had an email address. So, yeah, all of these things were kind of catapulting. It's good and it's bad. I don't want to speak ill of people, but there's a lot of people nowadays that probably wouldn't have a career if it wasn't for the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fair. We're I think the hardest thing and the thing that still is challenging to me is, nowadays you don't have to do as much or be there as long to get your credibility. Like, I had to really work my way up the ropes, and I was kind of under the tutelage and had a lot of mentors that were big names in the game, and people, still know them to this day. And it was kind of like, I took the steps, I was like going through my apprenticeship, where now, you can get your phone and do some YouTube stuff and act crazy, and all of a sudden, you've got this audience. And I think that it's very difficult for like a customer or somebody listening to this podcast to know, hey, is Ross Robertson the real deal, or compared to, this guy over here, because it's so difficult to judge credibility anymore, where in the past, like, Al Linder would not put you in Fisherman magazine if you weren't a stick. There was kind of like, there was a set of steps, you know what I mean? You had to be like a made man. And nowadays, it's tough for people to qualify and quantify whether you're trying to hire a guide or you're taking some information from somebody trying to learn something. Maybe it's just a how-to video on YouTube. And that's obviously true of fishing, but it's true of anything in life. I mean, does this person that I'm listening to know what they're talking about?
And in the end, the proof, typically is in the pudding, right? I mean, the fish don't care, if you're Al Linder or Ross Robertson or Tayler Michels, in the end, you got to get the fish to bite. And you've definitely proven in your career, you've been around for a long time, but you're still not that old of a guy. You've got a lot of career left, and that's really exciting. I mean, you've been the Great Lakes guy for quite a while. And probably this is one of the most exciting things about having you on. You and I have never met in person. I hope to change that at some point in time, sooner or later. But I need to learn from you. I'm thinking, it's not very often a guy gets Ross Robertson on the phone. And so when I think Great Lakes, it's, especially open water, it's trolling. I mean, there's, casting bite opportunities and different things like that, but there's just so much trolling, and it just seems like such a daunting task for the average fisherman, or, it's not necessarily entry level, going out on Lake Erie and trolling entry level, and hiring a guide like your service or others like it can be super valuable. What would be some of those things that you would say to somebody that's looking to go fish Erie for the first time, and maybe they think it's going to be a body of water that they want to fish down the road, but they should definitely be considering a guide for their first time or two out there?
Yeah, my guide service is kind of unique in that these aren't like hard fact statistics, but at least probably half of the guys that fish with me own their own boat. And I could tell you, I don't know how many just I could rattle off loosely that, these guys are doing just what you said. They want to learn, different things and apply it to their own situation, because we all do things a little bit different. I tell people all the time, sometimes, I learn things from people what to do, and sometimes I learn from people what not to do, right? So, the biggest thing I think on the Great Lakes, and you've had people on the podcast before, like guys that I know personally, like John Hoyer. There's other guys like I've had on my show, like Joe Okada, who, both those guys have won multiple tournaments casting. And it's not that you can't cast on the Great Lakes, but the reason you generally don't is you have to cover water. These fish just have a bigger pool to swim in, and trying to locate them and pin them down and stay on them is just harder with casting. Not that it doesn't work, but the big thing is I like to call them educated lines. Like now we're allowed 3 lines in Ohio. So if me and you are out tomorrow, we can run 6, what I'm going to call educated lines, because I think I know what I'm doing with them. At least I try to. If me and you were casting, we're down 4 lines. So that's 4 less opportunities to figure out a depth or a color or whatever it may be, or a presentation just in general. So the trolling thing is my whole game is based on finding fish quickly. And trolling, you can just do that better. Now, obviously, electronics, just like some of those guys I mentioned, they narrow down whether it's side imaging or marking at speed very, very quickly. But my number one thing, and I've been doing it literally, the 2 guys I mentioned before, Dave Hansen and Gary Roach taught me this. It isn't like this is my deal. But, marking fish at speed, it's evolved a tremendous amount, because when I did it with those guys, we were using an old flasher, like old school flasher, like, flush mount, like 1960s bass boat deal. And, the disadvantage obviously is it's much tougher to read those, especially when you work in contours or any type of rock situation. just like when you're ice fishing, it's much tougher to see those fish on the ledges if you even can. There's that dead spot. But the big thing is we got a lot of nasty weather out here. And when you're in 3-foot waves, it's hard to stare at a flasher and not like shoot yourself in the foot and, drive into a wall of water. So nowadays, like I run a Humminbird Helix, I've got probably 10 or 12 seconds of history that I can see, and I can see multiple fish in the column and, kind of reference that. Heck, you can save it, But being able to do that, I would say 25 to 35 miles an hour, very, very effectively. Realistically, you can do it in that 40-mile-an-hour range. Once you get much more than that, you start losing quite a bit. But for me, that's how I eliminate these things, and I can stay away from, the masses for the most part. And, when those fish start moving, I can get back on them quickly.
So, just to kind of continue on that line of covering water, talk about the fish patterns specifically when they're coming out of shallow water spawn, and that's happening early spring. When they're coming out of there, I mean, how soon do you go to trolling, and how deep are some of those fish, and how does that pattern progress?
We're slightly different. There's a lot of rules on Lake Erie that are Lake Erie rules. If you were to apply that other places, it just wouldn't work really well. And, I mean, you can troll 12 months a year if we don't get ice, which we did not get ice this year. I've done it many times where we're trolling the entire season. Not that, we don't slow down and jig or something like that. And, when we get to, like, let's say early season, I usually have both, trolling and jigging or casting gear in the boat, because when we're, let's say, 25 to 45 feet of water, I mean, I know that's a wide range, but when those fish are on the pre-spawn or really late winter, they could be on the bottom one day, or they could be suspended 15 feet down, in the open water. And when they're suspended 15 feet down, you can't beat the old planer board and crankbait deal. You just can't. But when those fish start getting on the bottom in 25, 30, 35, 40 plus feet of water, it's tough to beat the casting or vertical jigging deal, just like you would anywhere else. So really, I mean, you can do just about anything on Erie. It just depends on the day-to-day with where the fish are positioned in the water column, truthfully.
Talking about that late winter, and then when you get into summertime, what are some of the main like rules of thumb, you might call it? Like, what are some of the basics, like 101 when you're in the boat, things you got to have? Like, what's your gear list look like?
Well, again, on Erie, it's a pretty long lake. It's hundreds of miles long, and the biggest fish travel east fairly quickly after spawning. They hightail it out of there. These fish, they eat different things. They're on their own page. Where some fish stay back in the western end, and I mean millions of them, and they target different stuff. Generally smaller shiners and things like that. Where the bigger fish chase those, smelt, rainbow dace, other things that are a little more temperature sensitive. So you kind of start getting multiple patterns at that point, almost like chasing a different species, because those bigger fish, let's call them 5 pounds and above, they just totally are in different places and they do totally different things. But recently, I think, and when I say recently, maybe in the last 3 years or so, our fish, for whatever reason, I don't know if you want to blame it on our water being so clean or the forage or whatever it may be, they're deeper and deeper and deeper. If you look back at old magazines and TV shows from, let's say 10 plus years ago, you almost couldn't fish shallow enough. The fish just kept suspending higher, higher, and higher. And not that doesn't happen now, but it's much, much more rare and more inconsistent. So as we get into summer, the crankbait thing works. A lot of times now we're putting snap weights on them, even 2 ounces, in order to just get those down in that depth range where we're going to get bit. And I've been pulling a ton of dipsy divers, because they're just so easy to get down and, get back up with a multitude of different lures on them. Occasionally crawler harnesses, but often not, just simply because of too many junk fish and, just efficiency with keeping them in the water. But a lot of spoons and a lot of crankbaits. It's typically a stick bait of some type.
So Ross, when I look over your past career, I see some significant tournament success in your past. In recent history, you've kind of phased tournament fishing out. You're a lot busier with other things. I just want to hear, in your own words, what that transition in your career has been like.
It's one of those things where, as you get into the game, it's kind of like I say this all the time with like sponsorship stuff. I was talking the other day, and we were talking about guys, or Bill Dance or Al Linder, any of those guys, and they all have one thing in common, Forrest Wood of Ranger Boats, the late Forrest Wood. started off as guides, to get good water time, and that was kind of me too. I guided to make money and get more water time, and I was fortunate that I had a lot of tournament success early on, and that definitely helped me with the progression to, getting into, In Fisherman magazine back in the day, which was so important, and other outlets like that. But as I moved forward, I had my own TV show. I'm doing my own podcast. I do, a contract radio show. I host other shows, and I write for about 20 publications. So my business has really totally evolved as I kind of became, awkward to say, but maybe a little bit of an authority on bigger lake fishing. My business is big water fishing for a good reason, and really I'm more valuable, to the people that I work with, and overall it's we just, unfortunately, walleye tournaments don't have the reach that they used to have, and I don't like it either, but it's a reality. So the best thing I can do for the companies that I work with is to promote through other things like magazines and TV and these other outlets, doing just different things in order to get product design, get into water time. All of those things kind of revolve into that, and the tournament game makes that pretty tough anymore.
So, Ross, as an authority of Great Lakes fishing, the NWT has been adjusting its schedule a little bit because of this crazy coronavirus stuff that's going on in the world right now, but that's not going to last forever. Considering there's a chance that the second stop for the NWT being Lake Erie could potentially happen maybe sometime in June, let's say, for the sake of the conversation, what would you expect the outcome to be of the NWT for those fishermen, assuming they get to fish Lake Erie in June?
It'd probably be one on a crankbait, would be my guess. I think that's, I wouldn't say safe to say, but most likely it'll be one on a crankbait, and, probably not as big of weights as what you're going to think it would be my guess, because we had a very mild winter, and these fish are already spawning, and the big fish are already starting to make a move. So depends on what happens with the weather, moving forward in case we get something else crazy, but a lot of those big fish are going to probably be out of the zone and past. So we've got a really good problem, kind of the second half of that equation is we've got a really good problem here that I just read the numbers of catchable legal-sized walleyes in Lake Erie are about 150 million. And if you do the math with what they've said the last few years and really do the math, it's about 175, 180 million fish in the system. So we have a problem of there's a lot of pesky 2 to 4 pound walleyes, and they're almost like invasive species when you're tournament fishing, because you catch so many of those between 2 and 4 pounds. It becomes really tough to keep your lines in the water and finding those better fish.
And I mean, do you commonly that time of year have to sift through small fish to find big fish, or are the big fish doing something different and you gotta try to make those moves?
Well, like I said, Lake Erie, these fish just have a bigger pool to swim in, and those bigger fish start moving, early, and they're moving even earlier this season, or at least it appears to be at this point, than they even normally would. So when you're talking about June, those fish are way, way post-spawn, and they're going to be way out of, I don't know what the bounds are for the NWT, but where they typically put that, those fish are just going to be out of bounds or out of fuel range or out of realistic fishing range for those guys. Obviously not all of them, but it's going to be like a needle in a haystack a little bit more.
Sure. And then after that, presumably sometime in July, potentially, or even August, depending upon if they keep the schedule or not, that Green Bay tournament out of Oconto after that. What do you anticipate for the boys to run into for that?
That's been kind of going back and forth, and traffic plays such a role in that, depending on, and weather, right? A lot of those guys are making big runs to the outer reaches of Green Bay, if you can even call it that at that point. And it seems to be, I would say, 50-50 with trollers versus casters, but the casting thing, like Hoyer, and Okada, those guys we previously mentioned, have done really well there, been in top 10s or top 5s. And those guys are casters at heart, even though I know that they pull some fish out with doing the trolling thing based on the weather. Because it seems like anytime they have a tournament in Green Bay, the weather gets nasty or flat calm, and the flat calm makes the bite tough, and when it gets nasty, obviously, just getting to your fish becomes sometimes difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah, and that boat safety is just such a big deal on the Great Lakes. I mean, the Great Lakes themselves, they almost come with their own safety manual when it comes to how you navigate those waters in comparison to, smaller lakes, so much of the rest of the Midwest, what walleye water looks like comparison. And the tournament pros typically having that experience to navigate that water. But, I know I'm repeating myself here, but just circling back to, navigating the Great Lakes and learning the nuances and trolling, if you're going there for the first time, you might be considered a pro, on your home body water where you come from. If you're going to Lake Erie for the first time, it's just invaluable, just in the fishing nuance, but also the safety, to consider hiring a guide your first time out.
Yeah, I mean, I've got over 4,000 days on the Great Lakes, and that's a lot of days doing anything. I'm 6'3". I'd probably be about 6'6" if I didn't fish, I think. I've been down so long. But the reality is you don't necessarily always fish where you want to fish, and I think the guys in Green Bay know that better than anybody. You fish where you can fish. I don't fear the water whatsoever. It wouldn't be real good in my line of work, but I respect the hell out of it, because you just know some days it's just what you want to do ain't going to happen. You just ain't going to. I tell clients and media people are probably the worst when we're shooting TV shows and stuff. I tell them, the Edmund Fitzgerald sitting on the bottom, and she was about, 100,000 feet longer than we are. So it's just, you just can do what you can do a lot of days out there.
That is a great point. Well, Ross, man, I tell you what, we could do this forever. I could sit and listen to you talk and teach me how to do stuff forever. Let's wrap this one up. Let everybody know kind of some of the content, where they can find it, and what's some of the content that you've been putting out lately.
Yeah, Big Water Fishing is my business, bigwaterfishing.com. And if you find me on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff, it's the same thing, Big Water being one word. So Big Water Fishing, we've got everything from podcasts to YouTube stuff. We've got, a ton of things. We work with Meat Eater, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, and Fisherman. Well, like I said, about 20 publications. You can find my stuff out there. And a lot of that stuff we put right back on my website. So check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Big Water Fishing.
Awesome, Ross. And, dude, well, let's do this again sometime. We'll be in touch. Good luck fishing.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Well, there you have it, everybody. Ross Robertson, a.k.a. Big Water Fishing. You can't think Great Lakes fishing without thinking Ross Robertson. Thank you so much for offering up some of that windshield time just to teach us all a little more perspective on fishing the Great Lakes. And thank everybody for tuning in. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook. If you're watching this on YouTube, head down to the comment section. Let us know what you like or don't like. If you got an idea for a future guest or topic, let us know. We're also on Stitcher, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts you can share with your friends.